How brutal could life in one of the world's greatest cities, New York, be in the 1800s? Not the glamorous New York of dreams, but a hidden corner that few dared to confront. Today, let's explore the most horrifying things and tragic stories about life in the working-class Fourth Ward of Lower Manhattan, a place that produced more criminals than all other areas of the city combined. Be ready, because what you are about to hear will change how you view New York's history and might make you reflect on the values of life today. The most horrifying facts about 19th century New York slums. The population boom and industrialization transformed New York in the late 19th century into a terrifying labyrinth of slums where thousands struggled daily to survive. The short answer to how life in New York society was in the 1800s is summarized in one word: horrifying. The massive population increase combined with industrialization created unimaginably terrible living conditions for the city's impoverished residents in the late 19th century. Fortunately, in the shadow of oblivion and extreme poverty, a flickering light bravely shone on the truth. That was Jacob Riis, a Danish-American social reformer and photographer. Riis was a police reporter, and he made significant contributions to reforming the city's dire sanitary conditions by documenting and exposing the dilapidated tenements in the slums and the irresponsible attitude of landlords. Having experienced hunger and homelessness upon arriving in America in 1870, Riis understood the suffering of the destitute better than anyone, and his documentation is the most vivid proof. As a reporter, he revealed and photographed the dark streets of crowded tenements, old beer parlors, crime, and poverty in the city's Lower East Side. Today, you will hear Jacob Riis himself describe the disgusting living conditions of some of the dilapidated, cramped, and filthy alleys in Lower Manhattan's Fourth Ward. You will discover the incredible characters who lived in these terribly cramped and dirty tenements in these alleys, including stories of strange names like swamp angels. This is the story of people forced to live brutal lives in New York's back alleys. Prison architecture in the heart of the city. Leaving the elevated train line where it plunges under the Brooklyn Bridge at Franklin Square, just a few steps will take us where we need to go. With the noise and roar of the train still echoing in our ears, we turn a corner from prosperity to poverty. We are standing in the domain of the tenements, in the shadow of gigantic stone pillars. Old Knickerbocker-style houses lurk like ghosts of a bygone era along the winding slope of Cherry Street, an area once proud and fashionable as Cherry Hill. Close your eyes and imagine yourself lost in a New York alley in the 1800s. It's not an open alley or a pretty little pathway. Instead, it's a crevice so narrow that it's less than a single adult step wide. On both sides of the passage, one side is a rough, soaring brick wall, completely bare, with no windows, no openings for light to penetrate. This wall stands tall, blocking every ray of sun, every breath of fresh air, like a curtain covering life from the outside world. And this is not a dead end. Not at all. This is the entrance to structures called ugly barracks, blocks of buildings that, at first glance, exude a gloomy, heavy appearance, as if they were built not for people to live in, but to imprison them in a dark and suffocating life. These buildings, according to Jacob Riis, were constructed with a single, incredibly cruel purpose: to house as many people as possible at the lowest cost. They were terrible ideas born of a careless day, a day when greed-blinded reason and human value was placed lower than profit. No thought was given to the health, the spirit, or the future of the residents. They only thought about the number of rooms that could be crammed, the amount of rent that could be collected. And upon entering these barracks, an even more horrifying reality emerged. Their state of disrepair was beyond all imagination. The floors were rotten, each step creating a gruesome creaking sound, as if they could collapse at any moment, dragging down the lives clinging to existence. The stairs creaked, decaying under the weight of time and hundreds of thousands of tired footsteps. But most terrifying of all was the air. The air was heavily polluted by the pungent smell of boiled cabbage, mold, and a terrible stench of general unsanitary conditions, all blended together, forming an unpleasant, thick mixture that made every breath a burden. The shared sinks in the hallways, meant to serve essential sanitary needs, became a source of poisoning for everyone alike due to their horrible stench in the summer. This was not a place to breathe, but a suffocating trap, a prison without bars. Human health was cruelly destroyed by inadequate conditions. Water was a luxury. Even doing laundry was a constant battle. There was no fixed laundry day. It was laundry day all week due to the scarcity of replacement clothes for the poor. Rows of rags drying on clotheslines were a sad symbol of honest poverty. Life here was a continuous struggle, where cleanliness became a tremendous effort, and the desire to be honest was expressed through efforts to keep clothes clean. The level of filth in these tenements was unbelievable. Jacob Riis once recounted a haunting story about how he accidentally set a house on fire with a flash lamp while taking pictures. The fire flared up for a moment, then strangely extinguished. A policeman who witnessed the event couldn't help but laugh and explained a horrifying truth. That house burned 6 times last winter but could not burn down because the dust on the walls was so thick, it put out the fire. Can you imagine? The dirt was so thick it became a fire-resistant armor, a living testament to extreme unsanitary conditions, to decades of accumulated dust, grime, and neglect. And the sunlight? The sunlight has never shone in this alley since the day the devil planned and man built it. This statement by Jacob Riis is not just a metaphor, but a stark truth. Those alleys, those rooms, were forever shrouded in darkness. The lack of light not only affected vision, but also suffocated the soul, dragging people into persistent gloom and despair. Every morning, residents here did not greet the dawn with light, but with the heavy transformation of darkness into an indefinite gray, signaling another day beginning in confinement. Blind Man's Alley. In that labyrinth of dark alleys, there is a story of greed and retribution that even the most seasoned individuals would find hard to believe. Can you believe that a blind landlord made a fortune from other blind people, only to eventually experience the same suffering himself, living in the eternal darkness he inflicted on others? This is the story of Daniel Murphy. Old Daniel Murphy, as he was called, was the landlord of a peculiar alley dubbed Blind Man's Alley. The name itself reveals its cruelty. This alley was not just an ordinary alley. It was a gathering place for a large group of blind beggars. Imagine the scene. Dozens, hundreds of sightless people, unable to see the light, daily fumbling and groping their way along the rough, filthy path, with a faint hope of receiving some mercy from passers-by. The tapping of their canes on the ground, the sighs, the pleas, all created a symphony of misery that no one wanted to hear. And Daniel Murphy, the owner of the houses these unfortunate people had to rent, made a huge fortune from their suffering. In fact, he amassed $400,000 from this alley and neighboring tenements. $400,000 in the 19th century was an enormous sum, a vast fortune built on exploitation, on the tears and despair of the most vulnerable. His greed didn't stop at collecting rent. He even vehemently opposed all attempts to improve the houses. Even when the Board of Health finally forced him to repair and clean up the worst of the old buildings, under threat of evicting all tenants and locking the doors, the work proceeded, despite the old man's angry protests. Daniel Murphy once stated coldly and cruelly, "These people are not fit to live in a nice house. Let them go somewhere else, and my house will stand." He cared nothing for the terrible living conditions, the rampant diseases, or the ruined lives. He only wanted to preserve his fortune, to preserve the filthy den that brought him a luxurious life. Without sunshine or joy, Blind Man's Alley still had something the poor in the slum desperately craved: one payday a year. Sunshine entered the lives of these pitiable people, both present and past, in June, when the director of the Pauper Fund disbursed the annual $20,000 granted by the city to the worthy blind poor, a half-hearted acknowledgement of its inability to provide for them otherwise. Blind Man's Alley took a holiday and went to see Mr. Blake. That night, the place was noisy with unwelcome revelry. There was the scraping of squeaky violins in dark rooms and old, cracked voices singing long-forgotten songs. Even the blind landlord rejoiced, for most of that money flowed into his coffers. But life is full of irony. The most heartbreaking paradox occurred. Towards the end of his life, Daniel Murphy, who had grown rich on the blindness of others, was afflicted by the very same condition. He, too, went blind. The fate he had inflicted upon the wretched, the darkness he had exploited to accumulate wealth, now enveloped him. He shared the chief misery of the very wretches whose lives he had stubbornly refused to improve to add to his wealth. The physical pain, the loss of sight, and perhaps the torment of conscience, all descended upon him like a curse, a just retribution for his boundless greed. Have you ever imagined life this harsh and the price of greed so bitter? Share your thoughts in the comments. Children's tragedy and the price of life. In the dilapidated slums of 19th century New York, tragedy didn't stop with adults. It also enveloped the smallest, most innocent beings: children. The statistics from that era are silent screams about the brutality of life. Consider Gotham Court, a notorious slum. This place, initially built with good intentions, with the hope of improving living conditions for the poor, became a symbol of disastrous failure. In 1862, 10 years after its completion, a sanitary official counted 146 cases of sickness within the court, encompassing all types of contagious diseases from smallpox downwards. History records a shocking and deeply haunting figure. 61 out of 138 children born here died, mostly before they were 1 year old. Can you feel the weight of that number? More than half of the children did not survive their first year of life. Each daily statistic was a tiny life not given a chance to live, a dream extinguished, a tender heart that stopped beating in the arms of desperate mothers. Terrible sanitary conditions, malnutrition, and rapidly spreading diseases turned every breath of these children into a fierce battle. Jacob Riis, with his keen eyes and compassionate heart, did not just record numbers. He witnessed personal tragedies, moments where pain reached its absolute limit. In a dark, damp bedroom, where light had never entered, he witnessed a child dying of measles. Imagine the scene: a cramped, suffocating space, with only dim light from a flickering candle. On a dilapidated bed, a small, emaciated body trembled, breathing weakly, eyes gradually losing focus and sinking into eternal darkness. The mother, with a haggard face, eyes swollen from crying until they were dry, desperately caressed her child's tiny, fading body. She uttered heartbreaking words that Jacob Riis recorded, haunting to this day. "The little one died suddenly. If we cannot keep the baby, do we need to complain?" The words sound agonizing. It is the lament of a mother so crushed by life that she had to accept her child's death as inevitable, a cruel law of fate. It shows the extreme dehumanization, where the value of a small life was considered less than a speck of dust. Despair had permeated their souls so deeply that they no longer dared to complain or hope. This dehumanization was also clearly evident in how society viewed the people living in the slums. There was even a painful truth. The horse that draws the garbage cart, is worth a great deal more to its employer than he and all that belongs to him. Can you believe it? An animal pulling a cart, a material asset, was valued more than a human life, more than a family with all its dreams, fears, and love. This clearly shows how the poor, the laborers, were stripped of all value, all dignity, becoming mere tools, easily discarded when no longer useful. Imagine a family of 9, husband and wife, an old woman, and 6 children. They lived crammed into 2 tiny rooms. One room was only 10 square meters, serving as a living room, bedroom, and dining room. The living space was so cramped that every movement had to be calculated. Every breath felt compressed. The rent? It consumed more than a week's wages of the father, the only earner in the family. A week of grueling work, sweat, and tears, just to pay rent for a cramped, filthy cage. And then, tragedy finally struck. The mother, drowned in ultimate despair, jumped out of the window and was retrieved from the street, dead from overwhelming desperation. Gotham Court and the Wall of Revenge. History is sometimes full of painful ironies, where the best intentions lead to the most disastrous consequences. Did you know that one of New York's most notorious slums, Gotham Court, was built in 1851 by a benevolent Quaker? His purpose in building this structure was incredibly noble: to rescue the poor from the terrible slums they were living in, to provide them with a cleaner, healthier place to live. It was an admirable vision, a humanitarian aspiration. However, just 10 years later, that good intention turned into a horrific nightmare. Gotham Court not only failed to rescue anyone, but it became a notorious den of disease and crime. During the cholera epidemic, the mortality rate here reached an unprecedented level, up to 195 per 1,000 people. Can you imagine? Nearly 1/5 of the population of this area died in a single epidemic. Death crept into every nook and cranny, every room, mercilessly claiming hundreds of lives, regardless of age or gender. What caused a structure built with goodwill to become a factory producing sickness and death? Perhaps it was a lack of understanding of public hygiene, poor management, and more importantly, helplessness in the face of continuous waves of migration and poverty. What seemed like a paradise became a hell on earth. In its worst days, 1,000 people couldn't be crammed into the court, though that number was probably not far from the mark. Even now, under the management of conscientious people and an agent who is a king's daughter, whose practical energy, goodness, and shrewdness have done so much to retrieve its ill repute, the throngs it shelters would form more than a fair-sized country village. The diverse character of the population at this time, almost equally divided between Celtic and Italian, accounts for the iron bars and the presence of the police. It was a clear suggestion from the Irish that the police were present, due to the presence of 2 German families in the court, who were always causing trouble. A Chinese man I asked as he hurried through the iron gate of the alley put the matter in another way. "They are very bad," he said. Gotham Court has been the spearhead for the Italian element, who had little footing in the 4th Ward until recently, but are now pouring through Chatham Street from their stronghold in the Bend district in increasing numbers, seeking, as is their habit, the lowest level. But the tragedy of Gotham Court didn't stop there. Another equally haunting and tragic story is the Quaker's revenge. The brother of the man who built Gotham Court, named John Wood, was a man of great influence. He sold the Cherry Street frontage to a man who built a tenement there with an entrance only from the street. Mr. Wood then quarreled over the boundary line with his neighbor, Alderman Mullins, who had built a long row of court-style houses on his lot, and the older man struck him down. Legend records that the Quaker rose to his feet with the calm remark, "I will pay you for that, friend Alderman," and he walked away. The way he paid was by building the huge building behind number 34 Cherry Street, with a huge blank wall directly in front of the windows of Alderman Mullen's tenement, completely blocking light and air from them. But because he had no street access from his building, for many years it could not be rented or used for anything, and remained vacant until it came under the management of the Gotham court property. Mullens's court is still there, and so is the Quakers' Wall of Revenge, which has cursed the lives of thousands of innocent people ever since. This wall was not for protection, but for punishment. Just for a trivial land dispute, a misunderstanding, or an unnecessary personal vendetta, John Wood ordered the construction of a towering wall, completely blocking out the light and air from the neighboring tenement. Can you imagine? A silent wall, yet one that held the power to destroy lives. It not only obstructed views, but also suffocated the air, stealing the precious sunlight that the poor craved. Thousands of people, generation after generation, have had to live in darkness, in dampness, in suffocating air, because of a personal grudge held by a powerful man. Children grew up without knowing what the sun looked like. The elderly withered in the darkness. That wall of revenge stood as a symbol of inhuman cruelty, of how an individual could inflict boundless suffering on a community merely due to hatred and thoughtlessness. It stands there like a somber monument, reminding us of the long-lasting and terrible consequences of minor but malicious actions. Which of these stories makes you feel most unsettled regarding injustice, irony, or the consequences of hatred in history? The crime-ridden underworld, from swamp angels to ironic taverns. The Fourth Ward of Lower Manhattan was truly a cradle of crime. It was known as the place that produced more criminals than all other areas of the city combined. Its name was not in the city directory, but in public records, it held an unenviable position. Police Chief Murray, who was once the captain of the Oak Street Squad, in just 7 months sentenced thefts, robberies, and murders to a total of no less than 530 years in prison. Can you imagine the severity of the situation? Every street corner, every alley, every dilapidated house could hide an illegal activity, a criminal plan being brewed. In that chaotic underworld, gambling dens were not uncommon. They sprang up like mushrooms after rain, luring the desperate and destitute into a spiral of debt and crime. They occurred so frequently that they were nothing unusual on Cherry Street. Just a week prior, 2 or 3 blocks away, police had to intervene in one of these brawls at 2 a.m. to ensure peace for the neighborhood. This intervention took the form of a general shooting in which one of the perpetrators fell from the roof and was killed. Then there was a funeral as usual, and nothing more was mentioned. What more is there to say, really? And then, we have the professional thieves, those who entered legend with the strange name Swamp Angels. These thieves exploited a huge underground sewer system as an escape route when pursued by the police. These sewers were not small pipes. They were wide enough for a man to walk upright inside for the entire length of a city block and into the Cherry Street sewer if he was amused and not afraid of rats. They were not just escape routes. They were also places where thieves hid their spoils. If those filthy walls could speak, these great canals could tell many amazing stories. But they remain silent, and so do most of the people whose secrets they could reveal. The manholes connecting to the main Cherry Street sewer are now closed, unless the water is drained. Back then, there were no manholes, and there are records that the sewers were often chosen as shortcuts by the court residents, whose business lay on the sewer line near a manhole, perhaps on Cherry Street, or at the mouth of the Great Pipe at low tide. Although the Swamp Angels received their due, their successors continued the business according to the old standards, if not more boldly. There was one who was once a standout among thieves. It is said that he reformed. The police on the corner, addicted to professional skepticism towards all sorts of reforms, would tell you that once on the island, he paddled away on a plank paddling until he was picked up by a two-masted ship's crew at Hell Gate, whom he convinced that he was a fanatic performing some form of religious penance with his peculiar voyage. Beyond Tweed, the notorious thief worked in a broom shop and earned an honest living before entering politics. As we go from one narrow street to another, the strange contrast between the old-looking houses on the front and the towering tenements in the backyards becomes more prominent, perhaps because we expect and are looking for it. No one, unless they are looking, would suspect the presence of the houses behind, even though they have been there long enough. Here is a 7-story house behind a house of only 3 stories. Look at this Roosevelt Street alley, only about a step wide, with a 5-story house on one side receiving light and air. God help us for this pitiable mockery. From the gap between the brick walls, there are no windows on the other side wall. It is completely blank. The tenement fire escapes almost touch it, but the sunlight, rising, setting, or midday, never reaches it. It has never illuminated the alley since the day the devil planned and man built it. We have crossed the boundary of the 7th Ward. Penitentiary Row, a suggestive name for a block of tenements on Cherry Street, is behind us. In recent days, it has been entirely inhabited by Jews, who spilled over from the adjacent Jewish quarter. They are all peddlers and tailors. It is strange to read the imaginary inscription from other days on the door: "No peddlers allowed in this house." These thrifty people not only crowded into the tenements of this once exclusive area, but they also bought them. Jews pursued real estate as soon as they could save enough for a down payment to close the deal. Here is a jolly group, as cheerful as any on the avenue, though their carriage is a delivery wagon. The father is the driver, and he has taken his barefoot boy for a ride. They look truly proud and happy in their seats. The strange old building they stopped in front of is The Ship, famous for 50 years as a dilapidated tenement full of the most peculiar people. No one knows why it was called The Ship, though there is a legend that the river once flowed right up to Hamilton Street and boats moored beside it. It is more likely because it was as convoluted inside as a crazy old ship with its alternating ascending and descending stairs and its sudden traps. But Hamilton Street, like Water Street, is no longer what it used to be. The missions have driven the worst taverns out of Water Street. A sailor's mission recently appeared on Hamilton Street, but there are no taverns there. Nothing is worse than the popular tavern and the difficult, all sorts of tenements everywhere. Another example of irony in this slum is the name of a dilapidated tavern, Rock of Ages. That was the name on the door of a low-lying tavern, blocking the entrance to another alley, if possible, even more isolated and gloomy than the rest. As we passed Mullins Court, that name sounded like a mockery from days gone by, when New York's most wicked man lived just around the corner and boasted of his title. Life here was so harsh that the philosophy of life often found its way to the tavern, which was always ready to serve as a refuge from all troubles. These alleys, these taverns, these stories of crime and despair, all paint a picture of an underworld rife with injustice and violence. They are proof that when society abandons a segment of the population, crime will thrive, and places like the 4th Ward become constant breeding grounds for those marginalized by law. In the dark alleys of the 4th Ward, there is a passage so narrow that one can barely squeeze through, but very few want to do that, because that narrow path leads to the prison of the Oak Street Police Station, and therefore, it is not popular with the growing youth of the area. If you feel these real and haunting historical stories need to be widely known, please share this video with your friends and family. Surviving the 5 Points. Life inside New York's most notorious slum. Welcome back to Who Remembers. Today, we're going to dive into a chapter of New York's history that's both haunting and incredibly remarkable. Join me as we uncover the mysteries behind the infamous 5 Point slum, especially the area known as the Bend on Mulberry Street, where thousands of people fought relentlessly to survive. Get ready to turn back time with me, to explore a world filled with violence and chaos, but also a place that became the cradle of tragic tales and extraordinary resilience. 5 Points, New York's most notorious spot. 5 Points wasn't just a simple location on a map. It was a scar, a harsh testament to New York's rapid development. The name 5 Points has a very specific and visual origin. It came from the intersection of 4 main streets, Anthony, Cross, Orange, and Little Water, forming a total of 5 points or street corners. What made this area so unique, and the root cause of its urban disaster, was its unique geographical location. Built on a low-lying area, which was formerly Collect Pond. Collect Pond wasn't just a small puddle. It was a natural freshwater lake that once played a crucial role for a New York City in its booming development phase, providing a plentiful source of clean, drinking water and fish, a precious resource for the city's residents. However, New York's rapid growth, coupled with a lack of long-term planning and environmental awareness, pushed Collect Pond into an alarming state. As industrial businesses began to proliferate along the lake's banks, especially slaughterhouses and tanneries, the lake water became severely polluted by all sorts of organic waste and toxic chemicals. The clean water gradually disappeared, replaced by a foul, unusable liquid mass. In the early 19th century, facing uncontrollable pollution and the threat of epidemics, the city authorities made a seemingly logical decision at the time: to fill the pond. However, this landfill project was carried out carelessly and without proper technique. Instead of dredging or thorough treatment, vegetation and waste were buried directly under the landfill. As a result, as this buried vegetation decomposed over time, it created a large amount of methane gas. Along with this, the drainage system in the area was extremely inefficient, leading to frequent flooding, land subsidence, and transforming the entire neighborhood into a muddy, foul-smelling mire. The stench was so horrendous that many residents, especially the wealthy or those passing through, had to breathe through camphor-soaked handkerchiefs to endure it. This clearly shows the terrible extent of the living environment's degradation and pollution here. These horrendous living conditions and the rapid deterioration of the area forced the economically privileged middle and upper classes to flee, abandoning 5 Points. This left a void, transforming the area into a compulsory dwelling for poor immigrants who had no other choice. From the 1820s to the 1840s, 5 Points officially became New York City's most notorious slum, even known as one of the most infamous neighborhoods in the entire Western world. The formation of 5 Points serves as a harsh and profound reminder of the devastating consequences that poor urban planning and disregard for the environment can have on a society. 19th century New York was undergoing a period of rapid development. In this context, merely filling a polluted lake instead of addressing the root cause of the pollution was just a temporary solution, a surface cover-up that failed to tackle the underlying problem. The act of burying vegetation under layers of earth inadvertently created a ticking time bomb of stench and disease, turning the area into a truly inescapable trap for the poorest. These were the people who had no other choice but to seek shelter there, in an environment where even breathing became a challenge. However, 5 Points did not remain in that state forever. By the 20th century, the 5 Points area was heavily redeveloped. Today, a significant part of this area has become New York's Civic Center, an important administrative hub. This area now includes iconic structures like New York City Hall and One Police Plaza. Meanwhile, much of the remaining 5 Points has been incorporated into Chinatown, one of the largest and most famous Chinese neighborhoods in the world. To recognize and honor this historic and tumultuous neighborhood, in 2021, the intersection of Worth and Baxter Streets was officially renamed 5 Points. This was a symbolic gesture, both to commemorate the area's painful past and to affirm its incredible transformation. This change demonstrates the urban regeneration and recovery capabilities, transforming a symbol of decay into a vital part of a modern, dynamic city. Cultural contributions and the truth about crime. It might sound absurd to say that one of the world's most notorious slums, a place riddled with poverty and crime, could be the cradle of a unique art form. But believe me, this is absolutely true, and one of the most interesting, surprising things about 5 Points. This area might just be the birthplace of tap dance. The hypothesis is that African American dancers in 5 Points observed the lively Irish jig and then adapted it to their own style, creating a unique blend of foot sounds and improvisational movements. Tap dance isn't just a dance, it's a powerful testament to human resilience, the ability to transform hardship and deprivation into artistic inspiration. The fusion of the Irish jig and complex African American rhythms created an entirely new, revolutionary art form, laying the groundwork for many later dance and music genres. Artist William Henry Lane, dubbed Master Juba, or King of All Dancers, emerged in the 1840s with an early form of tap dance at Almack's Dance Club. This club was located at 67 Orange Street, right in the heart of 5 Points. Almack's, which is now Columbus Park, also played an important role in the development of the music hall genre, a diverse form of theatrical entertainment, and is considered a predecessor to later music genres like jazz and rock and roll. This shows that even in the harshest environments, creativity and cultural expression can still flourish powerfully, creating an unexpected and meaningful legacy that shaped American culture for decades to come. The reality of the gangs. Although Martin Scorsese's film, Gangs of New York, dramatized the level of violence and nature of gangs for cinematic effect, the existence of criminal organizations in 5 Points was very real, and they played an extremely important, largely dominant role in the life of the neighborhood. The appearance of gangs in 5 Points wasn't just isolated criminal acts. It was a direct consequence of a neglected social environment where the law and government support were almost absent. In such a world, gangs became a spontaneous form of government, providing a sense of belonging and protection for members, especially discriminated immigrants, without a voice. Roach Guards. This was a famous Irish gang that emerged in the 1820s. Initially, they were formed to protect liquor merchants from other gangs or robbers. However, over time, the Roach Guards shifted to more serious criminal activities, like robbery and murder, becoming a real threat in the area. William Poole, Bill the Butcher. He was the leader of the nativist Washington Street Gang, a gang composed of Native Americans with xenophobic tendencies. Later, his group merged into the Bowery Boys. Daniel Day-Lewis excellently and terrifyingly portrayed this character in the film, bringing a vivid image of a brutal gang leader. Although the film depicts Bill the Butcher dying in an epic gang battle, in historical reality, he was killed in a theater, a less dramatic death but still reflective of the underworld's danger. The portrayal of Bill the Butcher in the film, despite historical inaccuracies regarding his death, still captured the brutal nature and extreme personality of gang leaders of that era. Dead Rabbits. This was a splinter faction from the Roach Guards themselves, and they became particularly famous, strongly portrayed in the film Gangs of New York. The Dead Rabbits frequently clashed with the Bowery Boys, another gang composed of native New Yorkers with anti-immigrant stances. The confrontation between the Dead Rabbits, representing Irish immigrants, and the Bowery Boys, representing anti-immigrant natives, was a clear testament to the simmering racial and social tensions in the city at the time. These weren't just ordinary street fights, but battles for territorial control, resources, and a display of power by each faction. The Dead Rabbits had their distinctive symbol. They often paraded with a rabbit nailed to a pole as a display of defiance and identity. The Bowery Boys, meanwhile, had their own style with red shirts and stovepipe hats. Smaller gangs. Beyond the big names, Five Points was also home to many smaller gangs, each with distinct symbols and traditions to assert their identity. For example, the Shorttails were known for walking around with untucked shirts, creating a unique style. The Wyos, on the other hand, had a unique way of announcing their presence, with an owl-like whistle, creating mystery and fear. The diversity and complexity of this underworld show how each group sought to assert their identity and presence in a fiercely competitive environment. Major riots. 5 Points witnessed many major riots, authentically reflecting the deep social and political tensions simmering and erupting in New York City. These riots were not isolated incidents, but the eruption of accumulated social pressures in a society riddled with inequality and division. The rise of the 5 Points Gang. In the 1870s and 1880s, a group of Italian Americans rose and became the neighborhood's most notorious criminal organization, known as the 5 Points Gang. This group was known for its brutality and astonishing level of organization. The founder and organizer of the 5 Points Gang was Paul Kelly, whose real name was Paolo Antonio Vaccarelli. Initially, the gang had many Irish members, but later, the number of Italian members significantly increased and became dominant. Even more remarkable and shocking is that these young gang members later became notorious crime bosses whose names resonated worldwide, shaping the history of organized crime in America. Among them were illustrious names like Al Capone, Charles Lucky Luciano, Johnny Torrio, and Meyer Lansky. The brutality of the 5 Points Gang became legendary, but even more astonishing is that they trained some of the most formidable figures in American criminal history, who later built vast criminal empires. Beyond just street crime, Paul Kelly and his top lieutenants also sought to deeply infiltrate New York politics. They financially contributed to election campaigns, intimidated voters to secure votes, and even participated in ballot stuffing to support their candidates. Just like in the film Gangs of New York, this group collaborated closely with Tammany Hall, a powerful Democratic political machine at the time. The cooperation between Paul Kelly and Tammany Hall showed the complex and terrifying intersection between the underworld and politics, where gangs provided muscle and votes in exchange for protection and political influence. This reflected a painful reality in society at the time. In an environment where legitimate opportunities were severely limited, organized crime could become a path to advancement, even to power. Although Paul Kelly survived a shootout in 1905, this event is considered the beginning of the decline of his power and influence. Eventually, mafia gangs, a more structured form of criminal organization, gradually took over most criminal activities previously controlled by the 5 Points Gang. The rapid rise of the mafia was strongly boosted by the Prohibition Act in 1920, a period when the illegal liquor trade became a lucrative business, ushering in a new era for organized crime in America. The decline of the 5 Points Gang and the rise of the mafia, especially with the impetus of Prohibition, completely changed the criminal landscape in New York, creating a legacy that endures to this day. Dead Rabbits Riot, July 1857. This was a 2-day and 2-night civil disturbance that erupted from a seemingly minor street brawl between the Dead Rabbits and the Bowery Boys. However, this brawl quickly escalated, attracting the participation of around 800 to 1,000 gang members. They looted and vandalized property extensively throughout the city, turning familiar streets into chaotic battlegrounds. To quell this large-scale riot, New York authorities had to mobilize 2 regiments of the New York State Militia, along with police squads, and they primarily resorted to using batons to beat rioters. The consequences of this riot were 8 people killed and about 30 to 100 others injured. The 1857 Dead Rabbits riot clearly showed the inability of the authorities to control gangs and maintain public order. The need to mobilize the military to suppress it demonstrated the severity and chaos of the situation. New York City draft riots, 1863. This riot, though not exclusively in 5 Points, saw significant participation from some Dead Rabbits members. The main cause of the riot was fierce opposition to the new law conscripting men into the Union Army during the American Civil War. This conflict was also the climax depicted in Scorsese's film, showing its impact on history and popular culture. The draft riots highlighted the deep anger of the poor working class, including many immigrants, towards a military policy they considered unfair, where the rich could pay to avoid conscription while the poor could not. These riots are not just dark chapters in the city's history, but also important historical lessons about the consequences of neglecting social issues and class division in a developing city. Do you believe historical films should strictly adhere to facts, or is some fictionalization acceptable to tell a more engaging story? Life in the 5 Points slum. Life in 5 Points was a vivid, yet also incredibly painful and grim picture of extreme poverty. The tenement buildings, where people were densely concentrated, were terribly designed. They were overcrowded, extremely poorly ventilated, and often lacking windows, making the air stuffy and oppressive. Not only that, but these buildings were also known by another terrifying name: fire traps. The reason was the extremely high risk of fire due to flimsy building materials and a severe lack of safe escape routes. Once a fire broke out, residents had almost no escape, leading to horrific tragedies. In such a harsh living environment, dangerous epidemics like cholera, measles, diphtheria, and typhus broke out frequently, almost continuously. This was a direct consequence of extreme overcrowding and abysmal sanitary conditions. Children, in particular, were the most vulnerable and heavily affected. The child mortality rate in 5 Points, especially in the Bend area, reached a horrifying figure, up to 68.2% of all deaths in a typical block in 1882. This figure was significantly higher than the overall New York City rate at the time, which was already 46.2%. This is clear and heartbreaking evidence of the harshness of life there, showing that the buds of hope were the first victims of this toxic living environment. The alleys in 5 Points were dark, filthy, overflowing with trash, grime, and all sorts of waste. The foul odor and filth became an inseparable part of daily life. One resident once uttered a haunting phrase that revealed the desperation and the need to find oblivion in alcohol. "If you live in this place, you will ask for whiskey instead of milk." This statement wasn't just despair. It was a survival strategy, where alcohol became the only means to cope with the persistent pain and squalor. Fortunately, in that grim context, there were still individuals who stood up to fight for change. One of them was Jacob Riis, a Danish-American social reformer and photographer. He made immense contributions to improving the sanitary conditions of New York City in general. As a police reporter, Riis used pioneering flash photography, a breakthrough at the time, to authentically and vividly document the horrifying scenes of life, the dark corners within the slums in the 1880s. His most famous work was the photojournalistic book titled How the Other Half Lives, 1890. This book ruthlessly exposed the terrible living conditions of the poor to New York's upper and middle classes, who had previously ignored or were unaware of this reality. Riis didn't just write, he showed the truth. His authentic and devastating photographs struck a powerful blow to the conscience of the upper classes, forcing them to confront the reality they had tried to avoid. Riis considered the Mulberry Bend area, also known as the Bend, one of the centers of 5 Points, to be a giant pigsty of humanity. In his notes, he detailed life in the dilapidated, damp shacks deep within dark alleys like Bandit's Roost and Bottle Alley. The streets were always noisy with the cries of street vendors, offering all sorts of food of questionable quality. In those dark alleys, people lived crammed together in extreme squalor, lacking all basic amenities. Rees firmly believed that dirty houses make dirty people, a view emphasizing the link between living environment and human dignity. He also noted another interesting social reality. Women here often handled all the heavy, arduous work like carrying firewood and vegetables on their heads, while men often sat or stood on the streets, smoking pipes and arguing. Rees was not just a reporter, he was a true social activist. His work created a powerful wave of reform, demonstrating the extraordinary power of exposing the truth to drive positive social change. 5 Points was also a cultural and racial melting pot, a unique convergence point for many different immigrant groups. Initially, it was a settlement for newly emancipated African Americans after slavery officially ended in New York on July 4, 1827. Alongside them were Irish immigrants seeking a new life in America. Later, a large wave of Irish Catholics, famine refugees from their homeland, flocked to 5 Points in the 1820s to 1840s. Despite many underlying tensions and conflicts between African Americans and the Irish due to cultural differences and circumstances, their coexistence in 5 Points is considered the first large-scale instance of voluntary racial integration in American history. This was a unique social phenomenon at the time, showing how the compulsion of circumstances could lead to unexpected forms of integration. By the late 1840s and 1850s, Italian immigrants also began to flock to 5 Points, and the Mulberry Bend area gradually became the center of New York's iconic Little Italy neighborhood today. These immigrants, though from different cultures, all faced a harsh common reality: fierce prejudice and discrimination from the police, local officials, and other strata of the broader New York society. The police often treated them as second-class citizens, and local officials often ignored the terrible conditions in the area. This made self-organization and the creation of internal communities an essential survival mechanism for them. Although at times this very self-organization led to the formation of gangs and criminal organizations, it was also how they found mutual support and protection in an intolerant society. The diversity of 5 Points was both a source of cultural strength and a cause of social conflicts. What about the transformation from a place described as a pigsty of humanity to a park surprises or impresses you the most? Legacy and the transformation of 5 Points today. Can you believe that one of the world's most notorious slums, once a symbol of decay and violence, could almost completely vanish and change so astonishingly? Today, 5 Points no longer exists with its old, dilapidated streets. Many streets have been renamed or completely removed from the urban map. Specifically, Anthony Street is now Worth. Cross Street has been renamed Moscow. Orange Street is now Baxter, and Little Water Street no longer exists. This infamous slum was systematically demolished in 1892. In its place stands Columbus Park, a peaceful green oasis in the heart of bustling New York City today. The demolition of the slums and their replacement with parks wasn't just a mere renovation. It was an effort to rebuild from scratch, erasing a painful past. Seward Park was also created in 1901, contributing to creating more green space for the area. The formation of Columbus Park, right in the center of Old 5 Points, is a powerful symbol of urban rebirth, an effort to transform what was once a symbol of decay into a useful green space for the community. Surprisingly, even during its darkest period, 5 Points' bad reputation inadvertently turned it into a tourist attraction of its time, a form of dark tourism. Wealthy upper-class individuals sometimes had to be accompanied by police for safety in order to witness firsthand the squalid, terrible conditions they were fortunate not to experience. This act reveals the curiosity and, at times, cruelty of a segment of society towards what was happening in 5 Points. Famous author Charles Dickens visited 5 Points in 1842 while researching his book, American Notes. He was deeply shocked by the horrendous living conditions there and recorded his impressions. He described the area as a world of depravity and misery, filled with unimaginable filth and garbage. Charles Dickens's report wasn't just a travelogue. It was a powerful indictment of social injustice and terrible living conditions in New York, helping to spread 5 Point's notorious reputation worldwide beyond America's borders. The transformation of 5 Points from a giant pigsty of humanity into a peaceful park is a powerful symbol of urban rebirth. It was an effort by the city government to erase a painful past and build a better future for the area. Although the old streets are gone, the story of 5 Points remains an integral part of New York's history, a lesson about human resilience and the importance of responsible urban planning. 5 Points is a complex, tragic, yet incredibly important part of New York City's history. It is a vivid testament to the harsh challenges poor immigrants faced when seeking a better life in America. However, it's not just a story of suffering, but also a story of human resilience and incredible recovery. The people here struggled to survive, to find hope, and at times, to create art even in the harshest circumstances. While the film Gangs of New York brought this area global fame and somewhat dramatized the events, the truth behind it is far richer, deeper, and more emotional than what we see on screen. It's the story of a violent underworld, but also the birthplace of unique dances, talented artists, and where major figures in American criminal history got their start. We hope this historical journey of discovery has given you deeper insights into 5 Points and the people who lived, fought, and shaped history there. We hope this video has given you a deep and meaningful insight into a lesser-known part of New York's history, a part of history that we need to remember so as not to repeat the mistakes of the past. If you find this journey into a haunting past interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe WhoRemember so you don't miss future videos where we will continue to take you to other mysterious corners of history. Thank you for watching, and see you in upcoming videos.